Okay, we're going to call to order our special meeting of April 29th, 2013. And the only item on the agenda is discussion of fiscal year 2013-14 draft budget. Mr. Galloway.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, it's that time of year. You may feel it's a little late, but I think we're pretty much on schedule. I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to review for you briefly, as a reminder, the format that we started adopting a couple of years ago, refined it a little bit last year. It seemed to work very well for everyone to get a grasp of our budget. And so we're going to continue to use that format. The chart that is a reminder that from the current year's budget, we divided, and didn't divide, but the city has several operating departments. SUA has several operating departments. The general fund and the SUA are primarily the only two discretionary budget funds that the council and the trustees have. 95% of the services and the activities of Stillwater's total city government is contained in the general fund and the SUA. We will formally divide those into two separate budgets at some point. The general fund budget and then the SUA budget will be separate. We are required to file with the state of Oklahoma the general fund budget. We do develop an SUA budget, but it's not filed in the same way. But for understanding our budget, initially we have found that combining all of them together as one total operation from a budget standpoint and works point, it's much easier to understand. If you recall, what we started doing last year is trying to identify those departments of the SUA and the city that are necessary evils of doing business. It's the internal and overhead cost of operation. Administration, our technical division, our information technology department, human resources, legal, general government, general fund, insurance, SUA's administration, customer service, maintenance of the fleet, SUA insurance, and environmental requirements are unique in that none of those departments or divisions are in the business of a primary business of delivering a direct service to the public. These are the support services that are common to every service in the city. For example, all of the management costs are attributed to all services of the city. Finance takes care of the financial aspects of every service of the city. These are the indirect or overhead costs of the corporation, if you would. All of the services that we deliver are in development services, transportation, parks and rec, police, fire, library, waste management, electric, water, wastewater, and the airport. Those are the Stillwater city government, as we normally refer to it. And last year, that budget was approximately $92.7 for all of those services combined. That's SUA and general fund. We do have other operations in the city that are not contained in the SUA nor in the general fund. And the reason being is that we have some special purpose funds because the funding of some purposes of the city are restricted or they're designated. That is, the income can only be used for a specific purpose. CVB, Convention and Business Bureau, Hotel Motel Tax, CIRA, that's a typo, it was last year it was CIRA, this year it's CETA, our Economic Development Authority, are funded by an appropriation from general government, but after it's once appropriated there, it's for economic development. We charge stormwater fees, and that is restricted to stormwater purposes, and so forth. Transportation Impact Improvement Fund, Rural Fire Fund, CDBG grants, transportation fee, Stillwater Public Works Authority, Parks donation, Gailey May Koch donation, water capital improvements, and wastewater capital improvements. Those are all specific funds in the city accounting, and each one has a specific purpose and restricted or designated funds for that purpose. So those cannot be combined in the general fund of the SUA. The monies don't go back and forth. Within the SUA and the general fund, you have discretion on where you can move the revenues and what you can use them for. In these funds, you can. So these are accounted for by government accounting standards separately. We're not going to be presenting these budgets to you this evening. We have been working primarily on the general fund and the SUA activities. That's the primary part of our budget, and I'm going to let the ops group present those in a few moments. We are working on these special funds. Each of these funds have some one or more persons who are responsible for the conduct of these operations. They are working with finance and the admin team, putting those specialized budgets together. Those will be incorporated into the presentation at your next budget work session. But last year, the grand total budget was combination of the general fund, SUA, and the special funds was about $97 million. Now that's just to remind you of the format that we're going to use. You will, I will have a handout that has much more detail than this. For each one of these divisions, it'll show you how much is budgeted for personnel, how much is budgeted for materials and supplies, how much is budgeted for services and contracts, how much is budgeted for capital improvements, how much is budgeted for debt, should there be any debt responsibilities in those departments, and how many indirect costs are budgeted to those departments. So there is a lot more detail, and you will be seeing those charts. We did not last year and don't anticipate this year going through all those details item by item. That would take several hours, and you might all fall asleep. But you will get copies of them to study, and we'll talk about the total allocations and budgets by department. But you'll have access to the detail, and the public will too if they would like to look at it, and make recommendations on how you would like to adjust those, if you would like to adjust them based on your priorities. If you feel that you want more attention given to one department and less to another, you can certainly give us that advice. I will say that I've been really pleased that the operations group and the admin team has been paying a lot of attention to the visioning sessions that the council has had to date. You've had 2 of them. That conversation has had a significant impact on the budget process, because a lot of the things that we do match up with some of the priorities that you've all expressed in those visioning sessions about what's important for our community. So we take that into account when we're trying to allocate these funds. There's other factors. I mean, we look at what we need, what the public's expectations are, and so forth. But those are the things that we have reviewed. Who's the other one? But given that, that has been the basic process. Again, the admin team, CFO director, or CFO is Marcy Alexander, Public Works Director Norman McNichol, Utilities SUA Director Dan Blankenship, External Services Director John McClinney, and Internal Services Robert Barker, the admin team. We took the projections from finance, worked with finance, reviewed last year's revenues, worked with the finance department in developing projected revenues for this budget year. It's been a little interesting over the last 7 years that I've been here. When I first came in '06, the standard practice was pretty much to budget a 5% increase every year in Stillwater. The general trend of our economy was about a 6% growth, and usually a 5% was pretty safe until '08. Between 2008 and last year, You've experienced everything from a projected decrease to a flat, no increase budget. And last year, we projected a 2.6% growth. So we've gone through that freeze and started recovery. I know a lot of people look at sales tax numbers early this year, and it was publicized that there was some 10 and 9% increases over the same month a year ago. It's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, it didn't maintain that pace. We're still experiencing significant growth, but it's not at the 8 and 9% level compared to last year. Not everything experiences growth. Some of the rentals and fees and other charges of the city have shown some declines. Those are small pieces, but again, they're not increases. SUA had an extremely high revenue last year because of the record-setting heat and the record-setting drought. We don't expect that we'll have those record-setting conditions driving the demand quite as high this year, so we're a little bit more conservative on those projections. But in looking at all the revenue sources, the pros and the cons, we did come to the conclusion that a relatively safe projection and yet a little bit of risk is 4% growth. That would be an expected increase in our revenues of somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.6, 3.7 million. When you look at the proposed or hear the proposed budget tonight and compare last year's expenditures to what we're proposing this year, you'll see that the increase is closer to 6 million. The reason for that is that I point that out because that difference is not all projected growth. About 3.6, 3.7 million is projected growth. We have been very, very conservative this year and very, very cautious with the things that we do within the budget, not knowing if we're in that recovery mode. So we've been very, very cautious. We have examined very closely the money that we have budgeted for this year, but we're not forced to spend. We were able to hold on to some money. And so we have added that savings this year is in the balance. We project to be in the balance at the end of the year, and we're using it as a part of the beginning balance in next year's budget. So the proposed new budget will include the projected growth plus approximately $1.5 million from this year's savings that will go into the balance and added to next year's available funds. So that's kind of the background that's gone into this. The admin team did identify our fixed cost in our budget format. We left we put in the base cost of existing personnel and turned this back to the ops group, much like we did last year. We gave them quite a bit more decision recommendation making authority this year. We left more of the money undesignated for them to deal with because of the experience last year that it worked so well. And so I think we're continuing to grow and modify the budget process. And I know that I and the admin team were extremely impressed with their work on the budget this year. And so given that, tonight they'll make their preliminary presentation to you to show you how they arrived at that. Fortunately, this increase in revenue over last year, you'll see that we're able to address some capital issues that have been on hold for quite some time. I know most of you have been frustrated the last 3 or 4 years that we have not been able to do as many streets as we'd like to do. You've heard us talk about some building repairs that are overdue that we couldn't afford and so forth. But I'll let that be presented by the ops group. But they have addressed those capital needs as well. So given that, the current chair of the ops group is Parks and Rec Director Jim Scott, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Mayor, council. First off, I'll start by saying the ops group did a great job in going through and really studying and asking a lot of difficult questions with this whole budget. We started a little before we actually were given numbers and started looking through our O&M sheets and seeing, can we make adjustments in there? And we have some departments that cut back a few years ago that were still riding kind of where they were, needed to make some adjustments. And so you will notice as you're going through here, we did have some increases in the O&M budgets, but you'll also notice some departments that have some decreases in there also. Some of the increases you'll see in the O&M budget is because of staff moving from other departments or being reassigned into other departments. So if you see that personnel service jump in one department, by all means ask us, and we can probably give you that answer there. But we had some realignment of employees moving to different departments, park and rec and fleet maintenance combined mechanic duties, and so that's all under fleet maintenance now, so you'll see those numbers. I'll start with our detailed worksheet, and this is what the management team gave us. And again, like the manager said, I won't go through this line item by line item because it'll take a long time to go through that. Some of the big increases that I've kind of highlighted a little bit that you'll notice is, again, fleet, we combined services. And so they gained a couple of employees and gained some budget dollars there to operate another facility. They also have in their budget to replace a couple of fleet vehicles this year that are used by everyone in the city, not just fleet. As you go on down to transportation, and I think this is something that's been a topic before, you'll see a huge increase in their budget, and that's all capital dollars, basically. And we'll talk a little bit about capital later, but about a $3.5 million increase in transportation, and most of that's for street paving maintenance. Park and recreation, you'll see an increase. There's a decrease in salaries or in personnel services, but you'll see an increase in the budget, and that's for capital outlay. And a lot of that is for playground replacement through the parks. You'll see an increase in the library. The library is going to be getting some needed roof repair and some window replacement that's much needed at the library. I did skip police and fire. I will let you know police and fire did have, and you'll see that in the capital, but they did have some requests in there, and those are all in that also. So that's a brief outline of that. I know that was very, very quick, but that's where we were at. We did, again, we went through this. Everybody went through their O&M line items, their operating line items, and looked to see if there was any adjustments we could make. We did ask department heads to, if you needed to make adjustments, see if you can find it in the budget you have. And then there are some requests for additional items. The next sheet, and this is just more for information for you, looks like this. But this is the next sheet here, and it just kind of highlights some of the differences between last year and this year. Last year's original budget, we had $33 million in personnel services. This year's requested is $34. And you can see the percentage change. Materials and supplies have, the request is going up about $1.5 million. Services and fees are actually decreased a couple $1,000. Then your capital outlays, your big increase in the budget this year with about $4.2 million in capital outlay there. So your debt payment, you can tell we've paid some things off, so that freed up a little more money to be able to do other things with. So in on this also, you'll notice at the bottom the $1.6 million that isn't tied to any of the items up top. Part of that is for a cost of living adjustment for employees, and that's a 3% cost of living. And then also we have an O&M contingency fund of $564,000 that we're requesting to put in there. That fund's been very helpful this year in doing some things that we just didn't foresee happening. And this year's account's been used by public safety software. We've repaired some trailers that weren't up to code to go down the road. So we've done some trailer work in the water department, repairing a roof at the community center, just things like that that no one saw coming when we were doing the budget. The next sheet's a lot like the sheet that Mr. Galloway gave you. It has another side to it. I think the one Mr. Galloway gave you had last year's totals, and this year it has what we're requesting plus the difference in dollars. And so it kind of simplifies those sheets for you a little bit to where you can see the difference. Either it's a negative or a positive. Again, the top is separated out, and the services, the delivery services, our service delivery centers are down below. So you can take that, use it against the first sheet that I showed you, and kind of get those differences a lot easier that way. And then the last list of items that I have for you is our capital items request. And I don't know how detailed you want me to get into this tonight. I don't want to take any unnecessary time for you all. I can tell you this capital list was, what's the best way to say it? We went through it hard. Initially, we started this, we didn't have a budget yet. We didn't have a dollar amount yet. And so we started with bring us just what you have to do business. Just absolutely what we have to be able to do what we do, fix what we need to fix. And this is what we have. Each department came in with a pretty good list. We went through it item by item. Each department had justified it. There was lots of questions asked, some pretty difficult questions asked. Sometimes we went back over it 2 or 3 different times, and then when we got the dollar amount, we had to go back through it because it didn't match. So I can also tell you on fleet, and I know fleet's been a concern before, that all the fleet items that are in there was very heavily discussed. We used our current procedure that we have. There's 5 questions that we ask, and I'd love to tell you what those questions are, but right now I'm not thinking of all of them. But basically, each department had to justify every vehicle they requested. And it was pretty tough. There was lots of questions. There was questions about, okay, we have some vehicles that maybe we could repurpose. We could move around, and we have some vehicles that are going to go out of service if this is approved. They just weren't appropriate for what other departments needed to use them for. An example is a 1.5 ton truck's not really a good vehicle to put under somebody just to go check construction sites. You know, so you can repurpose, but it just doesn't make sense sometimes. So all the vehicles are in there. Police department has asked for new units. Those have all been approved or suggested, not approved, but suggested in here. All the capital items were ranked by the department head, and then we went through those. You can see some items in here does not have a dollar amount initially. One good example is IT, and it's on the second page, about halfway down. The total request or the total recommendation from the ops team is $360,000 for that. There were 3 departments that were asking for computer software, and all of it tied into kind of the same things. This solution works in with the current program we already have, and we can upgrade everything. And hopefully it will work for everybody when you do this, and we're not buying 5 or 6 different computer programs that we're trying to upkeep in IT. So that's why you see there was nothing as a request, but the recommendation, and you'll see in other departments where we've pulled those dollars out of those departments. Once we went through with the budget and we got our total numbers, you will see some blanks in the recommendation area, or some things we've moved to operations and maintenance because we felt like that was a better place. It fit better in operations than it did out of the capital budget. Then there's some other purchases through utilities, that there's other avenues to purchase those instead of out of this capital budget. So they've moved them to other areas for purchasing. So it's about all I have with the forms. I forget anything, Mr. Gowan? I'd be glad to answer any questions. A lot of the department heads are here. I know you just received this information, so there'll probably be questions coming at our next session, but I'd be glad to answer anything or any questions you have.
Yeah, of course, you can ask questions. I really, we can go in as depth of the questions as you'd like tonight. I think the main purpose tonight was to introduce you to show you what has happened thus far to make these allocations, give you the list of things that have transpired, give you some time to think about those, and when we have our next session, or even before, you can call me with questions. We can get answers from the group, but certainly at our next meeting, you will have a much better basis for beginning to ask questions and have the dialogue. Again, we can ask as many tonight as possible. A couple of things that I think that I'd like to highlight is not so much about specific items, but Mr. Scott made a couple of references in the presentation. One, when he was talking about, you'll notice some personnel increases in some department, but you'll see related decreases in other departments. I think this is a great example of what's been happening through this reorganization, and with the ops group working together, I think we've been able to identify much easier where we have overstaffing, understaffing, how we can reorganize and share some personnel between departments, and I think it's made for a huge improvement in the efficiency of where we place our personnel resources in the departments. And he also, when he was talking about the fleet, we've seen several items that were proposed in the budget, and through a lot of detailed work, they found that the item that was proposed was maybe overkill. It was too large for the need. They could save some money by a different type of vehicle. Also identified some vehicles in the fleet that were underutilized. They only were used part of the time, and some other department was making a requisition for a new vehicle, and we found out that the schedules could be coordinated and use the one vehicle instead of purchasing two. So those kind of things are what we have been aiming for. And when I look at that first sheet that he gave you showing the percentage of our budget in personnel, the percent in O&M, and the percent in capital, for a city to show 35.4% in personnel is kind of unheard of. Most city budgets will run around 60% on personnel. I will say that this number is not that low because the total cost includes the purchase of wholesale electric. If you take that electric purchase out, about 45 to 47% of our budget is in personnel. But that is an exceptionally good number in most municipal budgets to be able to allocate the larger percentages to capital and to materials and supplies. And I think we're achieving a balance and efficiency with use that is really bringing that relationship into a much more business-like combination. I think it's just an indication of the efficiencies that the group is gaining by working together. So I just think those are positives. Again, that's not about the specific items, but it's about the nature of the process and what's being gained by it.
Just a question. I noticed in here we're buying some surveillance equipment. Have we used all the money that we saved from refinancing our debt on this building?
We have some portions of it left, small amount. A lot of it, we've used part of it in some remodeling and updates. Some of it for equipment, electronic equipment in the building. We still have some repairs to do on the corridors. The wall covering is deteriorated, and it's becoming a hazard with all the dust coming out of it, and or at least a nuisance, if not a hazard. So we have funds left for that repair. Marcia, that's getting down fairly limited.
Some of it in the public safety software, some of that solution that fed through the whole building. So most, if not all of it, is either spoken for and covered, or it's been spent. There's not much available.
So it's pretty well encumbered then?
The only thing that, the only thing that I would ask, just looking through the list, on the video cameras for vehicles, the price that's listed here is looking like 300,000. I assume that will be for all the police vehicles or just patrol units? All patrol units. I might ask one other one. Okay, never mind, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I answered my own question.
This probably isn't a question for tonight, but when we come back for our second meeting, a question that I would like addressed is, I've got last year's list of capital items, and my question would be, I need an update. I need to know what of this has been done, what hasn't been done, and why, and where are these funds? They were budgeted last year. Where are they now? Are we planning on just carrying them forward and assuming that they're approved to address these things? Or what's going on? So I need an update on last year's capital list. On my quick glance through on this year's capital list, off the top, very pleased with the increases that we're looking at going to capital items. Very pleased with that. Very large percentage. And so that's where we need to be spending our money, since we haven't been spending much money in the last several years. So fixing what we've got and getting what we need, I much appreciated. So that's kind of my 30,000 foot statement. I want to do some more digging as we dig in, but I am liking the balance just off my quick run through between those areas that we've discussed, the public safety side, the infrastructure side, and the quality of life side. I am on the, speaking of that on the park and rec side, I did notice that, and let me make sure I understand this, the left-hand column that says request, is that the department's initial?
Yes.
And then the recommendation on the right is ops team?
Team's recommendation.
Okay, so looking at Park and Rec on page 3, with the initial request for playground replacement at 125, but the recommendation is coming back at 225. Am I reading that correct? Okay, very much like that. I think we have gotten a lot of mileage and a lot of good use out of our replacement of the playground equipment in our parks. The last one we did at Southern Woods, and I know we're in the midst of Couch, which is one of my questions from last year. And then I see on the next line down, tennis court repair. Requested 80, recommendation of 100. Is that, it says Couch Park tennis. Is that just the Couch Park courts?
It's geared, initially it was tennis court surface repair.
Okay.
We have issues at Sunset and Couch with both courts. Been working with the Tennis Association, trying to get some quotes, not finding anybody that's real excited about working on the courts we have at Couch because of the system. Still doing some digging on firm prices, but added a little bit to that so we could get those up and running for sure. and then take what we have, if there's any left, and do repairs on Sunset. We're going to do some immediate repairs or repairs now on Sunset, just trying to fill in cracks and keep them safe. But that's probably one of the items I have that's in my budget that doesn't have a real firm quote yet. It's close, but it's not firm.
And I guess while we're on the parking lot, it says right-of-way enhancements. What does that mean?
Yeah, I kind of came up with that term. Actually. We did through discussion with the ops group. In listening to a lot of, going back to some of the visioning sessions the council has had, and you talked about quality of life, and you talked about appearance in the community, and there was a lot of discussion about major entryways into our community and how, you know, if they have islands in the center, they could be maintained a little better, or maybe even some plantings in those entryways. And so when you come into Stillwater, the main entryways are getting a little TLC and upgrade that appearance a little bit. And we didn't really have a specific item that said that. And so it could apply to various locations, but typically it's going to be work in the right of way, whether it's along the sidewalk or in an island. We don't have any specifics, but we do want to start looking at those areas, and this was a recommended budget to begin to enhance those visual things that you see when you come into Stillwater.
Okay.
If that was a misinterpretation, you can take it out.
No.
Okay, our use tax, is it in here?
Pardon?
Didn't the use tax mature pay off all we this year?
We've, you'll see that show up in a couple of places. We've had, and we don't have all the transfers and those recommendations yet. We will put those together. The last 15 years, the first $600,000 of use tax went to by agreement to OSU for the Gallagher-Iba Arena. And you go back and look at that, that was done in the interest of economic development. We don't have a specific source for our multiple economic development programs except general fund. We fund a portion of the operation of the bid district with the bid coordinator. We fund the retail economic development program that we have now housed in the city. And we fund primary job recruitment, industrial recruitment through a contract with the chamber. That's all done by the trustees in the Stillwater Economic Development Authority, what used to be SIRA. And I would recommend, and this budget will contain a recommendation that $600,000 continue as in the past to be used for economic development and be transferred to CETA, and that becomes the CETA's revenue operating budget. Our total expenditure for total economic development right now is less than $400,000. It's less than $350,000. It's probably underfunded in some areas, but I can see that as economic development grows, we've already begun to look with CDAC and look at some potential contract work that may need to be done to increase the economic development efforts. There may be some marketing programs that aren't funded, some other issues, and this would give the trustees, the Economic Development Trust of the city, a fund. You could establish a revolving fund for possible economic development incentives, and so that's currently what's in the proposed budget. Any balance of the use tax would continue as it has in the past to be simply a deposit as a part of the general fund revenue. The projected use tax revenues above and beyond that 600 are included in this projected revenue available. But again, I think when I went back and looked at that use tax ordinance, when it was created, it was clearly, the first 600,000 was clearly set out as an economic development fund. And I think that with the recent upgrading of our Stillwater Economic Development Authority and the trustees having oversight over all the economic development activities, that becomes the appropriate managing source for that. You as trustees would manage that.
before our next meeting, could you get to us, you've given us the proposal on the expenditure side. Could you give us the breakdown of the revenue side?
Projected revenues, yes, absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, I want to echo a little bit of what you said earlier. I noticed, I don't know exactly where I saw it at. It was in water utilities, a variable speed drive. I don't even remember what it was. I don't remember how much it cost, but if I was curious if that had to do with our operation at Ponca, or if that was something else that we needed somewhere else in the utility system somewhere. I thought, did we put that out to bid and we're waiting for it to come back?
On which one?
The variable speed drive? If I'm not mistaken, I remember that conversation. I know what it was about. Have we put that out to bid?
Anthony, can you give us an update?
So we don't have a price or anything like that? Okay. Okay, so we're
Still in
kind
design.
of a planning, okay, well, that makes sense.
You guys still want some more time to be digging into this right now? You wanna, or do you wanna,
I think study it and then
I say, I know I need some quiet time with the feet propped up to.
We have all the budget, revenue projections, and we just failed to put that sheet in here, but that will be, we'll send that to you, and it'll be a part of the next presentation.
Will that, in that revenue sheet, and Marcy, pardon me for not using the correct accounting terms when I asked this, but will that there are some capital items in here that when I first look at them, they look like they could be or should be funded from the, for the Water Capital Improvement Fund. I mean, that designated fund. The difference between money coming from that fund that either we already have or will be collecting as opposed to general operations. Some sort of distinction there of,
You only have the general operation numbers. You don't have anything from the restricted revenues.
okay, so none of these expenses are intended to be paid from those restricted.
Right.
Yeah, and Jim-
Water or wastewater expenditures that you have are to come from the water and wastewater capital funds. Those funds are done separately, and they're done as the projects are identified, and they come to you all for approval. They're appropriated as they're identified and come to you.
But that's, and Jim made reference to that too, and both the ops group and the admin team, in going through this, we've looked at items with that very question. Is this an appropriate expenditure for our routine operating budget, or is this an item that should be paid for with designated and restricted funds in some places? We've identified a few that were more appropriate to those designated funds, so they were moved out. But the ones that remain in there have been looked at pretty closely, and they are truly operating expenditure.
this is just a what if. What if in November we go ahead with our capital bond and we propose a 1 cent increase, or 8 cent for roads, all the streets and roads? Would we still want to appropriate the $3,646,000 out of general fund?
This is pretty much, and Jason Peaks here, but we're playing catch-up a little bit. We were spending out of our operating funds $600,000 to $900,000 a year. In the last 3 or 4 years, we haven't been able to do that. And this is our first chance to get some of those caught up. And Jason can address it more, but we were fortunate to have that much capital to recommend for streets this year. I guess what I'm saying, I don't foresee we'll have that kind of capability next year and the year after in our operating budget. So it's really, really important that if we do get an approval of an extension of the transportation tax, we still need that in addition to this.
Mr. Peak, I actually have another question for you.
Yeah,
Time we call.
sure.
Councilor Hopkins, I guess to answer your question, one thing that I would suggest to you, within the transportation budget, we're not requesting any capital funds for what are called system improvements, like the Jardo Road or 19th Avenue project. I mean, these funds are, like at our work session back in March, dedicated solely to pavement management. So if we did go out with a bond referendum, there is still that need for the system enhancements identified in our transportation plan.
I'm not questioning our need. I
Yes,
know
sir.
our needs there. Is that, I know that if we do some things, we can come up with some more money. If this is coming out of general fund and we can find other sources to do it, then we can establish some other priorities for the displacement of the funds.
Absolutely. The only other thing I'd suggest to you is, we try to hit, pavement maintenance has a season. And, one of the things we'll be coming back to you on May 20th with a recommendation for the program. We kind of need to know what our budget is to do that. We want to hit the ground running. And so if we waited to start that pavement management program until after a bond referendum was done, we've basically lost, basically this early part of the fiscal year that's available for resurfacing, rehab, crack sealing, those types of pavement activities that you don't do in the cold weather. So that's one of the other reasons I would be advocating that we get a number for the operating budget and be able to start spending those monies July 1.
The other factor in that, and you sort of alluded to it, but if we were, hypothetically to go to the people for some kind of an extension or an issue for transportation this fall, it would be at least, from now, it'd be at least 6 months after this coming budget year before that money would be available in any significance. So this is funding from now till then. So,
I told you that's what if.
yeah, I understand, but, this buys us a year, and we're gonna have to be looking at what sources are available after this year. Absolutely.
Kind of tying off that, and back in our study session when we were talking pavement management, and my words were quality and quantity. And just to make sure that I'm understanding what this is saying, this proposed 3.6, that's pretty much talking quality questions, correct?
I guess I need to understand. What this does is, just give you a brief overview, this funds a pavement management program. 40% of those dollars would be allocated to reconstruction, where we physically reconstruct, rebuild a new street. 45% of those dollars would be allocated to rehab. That's where we do mill and resurfacing, structural overlays, panel repairs on concrete pavements. 12% of that would be allocated to what we call preventative maintenance. This would be your crack seal, thin non-structural overlays, spot repairs, and then about 3% of that would be to deferred maintenance. This is where we don't have enough money to go in and fully reconstruct a street, but there may be high severity potholes or significant panels that we need to go in and just fix those. Overall, we're talking 35 to 40 lane miles of pavement that would be touched by this program. So the recommendation that will be coming to you at that May 20th council will be a list of pavements with their different treatment techniques. So, we're trying to be comprehensive in looking at the entire network. It has a heavy emphasis on our local neighborhood streets at this time because that's where we've not had as heavy of an emphasis with our previous program. But it's basically looking at if we're maintaining our pavements on a 15-year life cycle, we're touching a part of that, a percentage of that system every 15 years.
Back at our workshop, Jason, when you presented the pavement management system update, I think what the mayor's referring to, as we got into the discussion, the quantity and quality terms came up. And anything that's done to maintain, even reconstruct and rebuild, as long as it's not adding turn lanes or additional lanes or whatever, that was what we called quality, maintaining the quality of existing
Exactly.
capacity. It was only things which enhanced capacity or routes would be quantity. And so all this money, and by that definition, is quality.
Yeah,
You
we're
don't-
not
you don't-
adding.
None of this is budgeted.
We're not
for
adding turn
increased
lanes, but,
capacity.
I'll give you an example. Monroe Street from 6th Avenue down to 9th. It's one of our worst collectors out there as far as overall pavement condition. One of our recommendations would be to go in there and reconstruct that. So that's a reconstruction. We've got segments of Monroe north of 6th that have highly distressed panels. So that might be a deferred maintenance or a spot repair where we don't reconstruct that whole section north of 6th University, but we go in and we fix those highly damaged areas. And that's what this budget would do, but it's looking at streets all around the city, not just the collectors or arterials, or not just the neighborhood. It includes a number of different streets.
And so from, you're saying there was since there's in this management system has a percent, whatever dollar figure is said here, this is yours, there's a percentage going to the different aspects. So regardless of the dollar figure that's given to you, those percentages with those types of work can be accomplished.
Yes, sir.
So if the dollar figure, I mean, we're throwing out here 3.6, if it was 7, it's just more of each
That's
to be
correct.
accomplished.
I mean, there's a little bit of adjustment if you get
Wiggle
outside
room,
of
I
that, but
understand that,
yes,
but-
but basically that percentage allocation is based on the current condition of our streets over the life cycle. So as we move through that life cycle, those percentages may adjust a little bit, but in general, that's where they'll be for just continuous maintenance and upkeep of our system.
Okay. Councilor Noble, do you have any questions?
I'm gonna study before I ask questions.
All right. Councilor Scott, do you have any other questions of the
No, sir.
operations group?
No, sir.
Okay. Vice Mayor, any other questions tonight?
Not tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Peak.
When I can get my red pencil out, I'll have more.
All right. Mr. Galloway, you have anything on rounding it up?
Again, that's the preliminary allocation of the projected available funds for general fund and SUA, subject to adjustment with your input. Of course, when we get this refined to where we're comfortable with it, then we'll hold public hearings and see if there's public input for any further adjustments.
When's our next opportunity in this type of settings?
Probably have to be a special meeting in second week of May, possibly.
Okay. Okay. I mean, what I heard from the group is that they're going to want another opportunity after
Oh, absolutely.
digging into this. So let's figure out when that's going to be and get that set. All right. So any other questions?
When
I
will
would-
we get the paperwork?
Pardon?
When will we get the paperwork, the revenue and expense projections?
Yeah, we'll be sending those out later this week.
Okay, great.
The other thing, I intentionally had this at this special meeting in this room so we could get the basics of what we have out to everybody, public. Normally, we'll have a working session where the council can sit around the table and staff sit around the table with them, maybe at the library or one of those other facilities where it's a good working session. It's still open to the public. It's not an intent to get away from there, but I think it probably makes a good working environment to really hash out some of the questions that you have.
We were at the community center last year, and I think that worked well.
So we may schedule the next study work session at the community center.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on tonight's items?
Well, it's time, Mr. Mayor.
Just thank the staff for the work. I know there's a lot of work went into this.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Okay, that is all we have on our agenda for tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I guess I should, I can't talk.
You want to?
didn't light up. So try again.
Yeah, they're not lighting up.
Still not lighting up.
Call the roll.
Mayor Bartley,
Yes.
Councilman Hopkins,
Yes.
Councilor Scott,
Yes.
Councilor Noble,
Yes.
motion carried.
We are adjourned.
Good.